What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip. And today you're going to get a special edition of the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. It's audiological, it's packed full of theology, and you're going to hear me talking to two of my best friends. It was recorded live in Charlotte, North Carolina. Up first, I'm going to talk to Anthony Smith. And if you remember back 900 and some episodes ago, he was like in the first 10 episodes of the podcast. Yeah. And then I'm going to talk to Ben Boswell. And he is the brand new senior minister at Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Like one of the biggest, proudest, passionate, progressive Baptist churches. And he just joined the staff there. And already at Myers Park Baptist was Chrissy. And Chrissy Williamson is on staff there, and she's a friend of mine from Divinity School. Ben is a friend of mine from undergrad. So it was a complete thrill to have Anthony and Ben on the podcast and spend the weekend with all the awesome people at Myers Park. So if you are in the Charlotte area, you should make sure you check out Myers Park. And, you know what I'm talking about? Say hi. All right. Excellent. Before we jump into the podcast, I got to tell you a couple things. Couple of them. First, Wild Goose Festival is happening in July. And if you want to come to Wild Goose Festival, and who doesn't want to go to the Wild Goose Festival and do their art, spirituality, justice campery in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina, then when you sign up, when you go to get your ticket, use the discount code GooseCast2016 and you'll get 25% off. That's right. Type in GooseCast2016. 25% off your tickets. I'll be there. Lots of friends going to be there. Some amazing stuff's going to happen there. Like homebrewed happy hours with Emily Towns, York Rieger, Daniel Kirk. The Culture Cast peeps are going to be there. Mickey Jones is going to be there. Look, all sorts of stuff's going to happen. I'll tell you more in the future. But go ahead, make sure you check it out, because July could just get more zesty if you're at Wild Goose. And then, like the week after that, in the middle of July, I'm heading up to Vancouver School of Theology. And I'm going to do a Theology Nerd Boot Camp with John Cobb and Jay McDaniel. That is going to be some process theology nerdery up in Vancouver. And then the next day, doing a live podcast. And Sally McFay is going to be on the live podcast. Yep. Check that. What I be talking about. Anyway, go to the homebrewedchristianity.com and sign up for our email list. And then you'll get emails about like upcoming live events, special videos and stuff that only get sent to the email list, and goodies like that. For all of you that did join the process webinar that I did with Monica Coleman last week, thank you. It was fun. Like over 500 people signed up. We had a great turnout live and have watched it since then. We're going to be sharing the video from the webinar soon on the website. Just go sign up for the email list, and then you'll get it sent to you in the email. That's how you do it. It's just going to get delivered that way. And in it, we mentioned that this summer I'm teaching a class, Monica Coleman's teaching a class, and John Cobb is teaching a class at the Process and Faith Summer Institute. So if you're interested in taking an online class with John Cobb or Monica or myself, then check it out. All right, here we go. This is the live podcast from Charlotte, North Carolina with Anthony Smith, Ben Boswell. We were at Birdsong Brewery, and it was an excellent experience. They have a Jalapeño Pale Ale that was yummy. My favorite was their brown ale. But you should go check it out if you're in Charlotte. Check out the brewery and check out Myers Park Baptist Church. Peace.
Ours is a time of social and spiritual upheaval and a desperate need of a path toward healing and reconciliation. The Drew Theological School can set you on this path. The Drew Theological School trains leaders, scholars, activists, and pastors to be rooted in Christian tradition, innovative in spiritual reflection, and courageous in pursuing justice. Through studies in one of the 6 degree programs offered at the Drew Theological School, you will become the rooted, innovative, and courageous agent of healing and reconciliation our world so desperately needs. To apply for one of the 6 degree programs at the Drew Theological School, visit their website at www.drew.edu/theological or contact their admissions office at 973-408-3111.
Christianity listeners, this is Tripp, and this is a live homebrewed Christianity podcast at Birdsong Brewery in the North Cackalack. That's right. And luckily, we're allowed to have this podcast here because there's only one restroom in the room, and everyone's allowed to use it. No birth certificate necessary. And which is like really, really good news to me. Because I asked my mom earlier today, she's been here, if she had my birth certificate. She said no. And I feel like that it's really hard to tell if it was added on or if it was circumcision mistakes. So we don't have to deal with that. There's only one option. Praise the Lord in the name of Jesus. So in the back, when you're like looking at the table and you're saying like, why is this very handsome man sitting there at a table with materials on it? There's all sorts of things. You can find out about the school I teach at. You can get my book, and you can also get my book, but you could buy my book when you're leaving for all your friends and family. And when you do, make sure you leave your name and your email address, and you'll get delivered to you 4 classes. Everyone else that didn't buy my book had to pay $30 for each one of them. But you can get all 4 of them just for paying for my book for just $15, because I was told that next time I'll actually make money on my book if I sell a few more. And I have 2 children. They need health insurance. All right, I was just pausing that. If you give a pause at that time, I don't have a Rolex to point out or anything to offer you other than like hours of really dense theological conversation to make you'll be distracted by your traffic if you're hearing me lecture about Heidegger. It's kind of like when you go to get an MRI, which no one gave me a heads up of what they do a couple weeks ago when I had to get one. They were like, "Are you claustrophobic?" I was like, "I don't think so." "Have you had an MRI before?" They did not ask that question. They're like, "Are you claustrophobic?" "Nah, I'm good. As long as it's not a bridge over large amounts of water." And then there's a giant tunnel with a machine in my face. "Don't move, sir. It's only 45 minutes. You didn't request sedatives." I was like, that was not how the question was asked. That was asked, "Excuse me, are you claustrophobic?" And I said, "No." But I did not know I was going to be in a tube with pop country music playing. This is Southern California. If you listen to pop country music in Southern California, it's not because your grandmother liked the first Hank Williams, your dad liked Junior, but you didn't like the third, so you listen to country musicians that rap. That is the thing. It was on. Rapping country musicians. And I thought DC Talk was horrible. This is just a whole new level. And so luckily I just I did contemplative prayer or something. Seems like a good spiritual answer. Anyway, I'm not sure how I got on MRIs, but I regretted that experience until they did the nerve test that involved jabbing needles in your arm and they wiggle it around and it makes noise. No one gave me a heads up on that. And no one gave you a heads up on exactly what's about to happen. But this is like the 40-something version of the podcast connected to the book release. And I'm editing the first 30 minutes of it out because I have friends here that I want to end up talking to. But I do want to tell you that in the first night I did the podcast in a brewery in Oklahoma City, I had a very interesting experience. because I had actually seen the physical copy of my book yet. And Fortress, in its editorial wisdom, had slightly updated a few passages. And I began to read a passage because I had pre-selected it. I didn't reread it to find out if the words the author of the book and editor of the entire series were in it. I just proceeded to read it. And it's in a chapter it says, Abba says drop the G. And this is the G out of kingdom. And there's very sophisticated historical Jesus research to talk about how Jesus is against patriarchy and hierarchy, and that the appropriation of kingdom language is a twisting and overturning of the common there. And it's like you appropriate the language, repurpose it. And it's like all nice, neat stuff. Retell a story of me talking to some theologians who have all their different ideas. And then I say, well, as a minister, I've just always said the kingdom of God. Because then if someone has a question about it, they come up to you after church and they were like, I kept hearing you say kingdom instead of kingdom. And I'm like, yeah, because Abba says to drop the G. And then they look at you, deciding whether or not they want to know why. And you're like, because if you drop the G, you get rid of the cock and the crown. It's alliteration. In California, you're allowed to do that. Except Fortress edited it to phallus and the crown. And on the front row was a dear Southern Baptist minister who listens to the podcast on the DL in Oklahoma. He had drove 2 hours to be there and got there significantly early, to which he said, I try to keep my boundaries and integrity straight, and I don't get my drink on in the city I'm a serving. Yeah, go ahead and pause and think about this. So you're a Southern Baptist minister who listens to my podcast, drove 2 hours to get shit-faced before the start of my podcast. And this is all I know about this guy. I read the passage and say phallus and the crown. I'm beginning to freak out that the thing got changed. Homeboy who listens to the podcast goes, oh no, Trip, that is not it. I know you like to say the cock and the crown. Not no phallus. When I went to media training with the publisher, this was not something that got discussed. They're like, what to do when Southern Baptist minister who drives far enough to get his drink on with his healthy boundaries and integrity for ministry begins to yell at you 10 minutes into your talk. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I say. I just got the book that I guess they had edited it. I don't like no phallus in the crown, man. Phallus gives me mental image. It's gross, boom. And I'm like, oh, what in the world do you do with this? This is the most awkward. I'm in another state. There are 4 people I know in a room of 80 people, and homeboy on the front row is discussing mental images to the one passage I read out of my book that I didn't even know was going to be there. And I'm thinking it's like the Burger King, the mascot guy is kind of creepy because his face doesn't move, but one step more disgusting. And then everyone's thinking it, but you don't know what to do about it. And so, I'm sitting there, I was like, I've worked for years to get to this point. And I'm in Oklahoma City. And senior minister of First Baptist somewhere in Oklahoma, I have promised never to go, just gave everyone the world's worst mental image. And now that part, don't read chapter 4. You should, obviously. But now it's permanently there. So I say all that just to know that it could not go that bad. Because I trust that none of you will interrupt and proceed to ruin everyone else's evening, but you will participate in the group singing. So with that, just know that you're about to meet one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my life, Mr. Anthony Smith. So give him a hand as he walks up here. See, I told you should wait till I told the opening bit before you came up and sat down.
Yes.
And, what's up, Anthony?
What's going on, bro?
Will you use the microphone? That way it goes on the podcast.
Oh, okay. Good.
You can kiss it if you need to.
No, I'm good. Hey, everybody.
So, Anthony and I met in 2005.
Yeah.
We were in high school, and I was a freshman at first year at Wake Divinity School, and a mutual friend of ours, Steve Knight, was like, Trip, you should drive out to Charlotte. We're going to go to Mac's Barbecue. It's the Emergent Church Cohort. And I drive out and basically discover that there was a cohort meeting, but I just enjoyed talking to you in the corner more than that. And since then, you've been like one of my theological man crushes.
Oh, man. I love you too, man.
Hear that affirmation? That's what I'm talking about. So, what question should I ask you so you get to tell about yourself so that everyone catches up so I can get to what I want to talk to you about? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Are you asking me what question you should ask me?
Yeah, so you can let them know about you. And this is all getting edited out, obviously. Oh. Beauty of the internet. But I want to fill them in. But then I also have like a stack of things I want to talk to you about. They're going to know who you are before we get to talk about it.
Sure.
Like it's just like us and a few people at a table having a drink, going to Jesus it up.
Okay. So who are you?
Hey, Anthony, dude. Who are you?
My name is Anthony Smith.
Oh, yeah.
I live in Salisbury, North Carolina, which is right up the road. If you're from Charlotte, you know where that is, in Rowan County. A church planner, a lead pastor, a community called Mission House. And in Salisbury, I do a lot of community organizing and activism around racial justice and civic engagement in our community. I'm also a neophyte haiku poet.
Haiku?
Yes, I write haiku, brother.
Yeah.
And also, I am also a trained zombie apocalypse survivalist. Amen. So, fan of The Walking Dead. So if you're ever in the zombie apocalypse, just hit me up. I can tell you what to do.
How much did you pay for this online certificate?
Well, I just read Max Brooks' book.
Okay. All right. See, I didn't even know you were going to say that. Like, I have an article I'm working on called A Guide to Being Human by a Comic Book Fan.
Oh, okay.
That in one of the sections on anthropology is all on zombies.
Sweet.
So we should make sure we return to zombies. Because if you say anything cool, I'll pretend I thought of it.
Yeah, cool.
When I left North Carolina, I voted absentee for Barack Obama in his first election. And then something happened to the state that was like the reasonable one. Now South Carolina, like, even though they have twice as many trailer parks, is seeming more reasonable than North Carolina. And every time I'm like checking in with you and Steve Knight and a lot of my friends, there is like the things that got made fun of on the Colbert Show about us. But then I also keep hearing these stories about the current cultural context bringing about new life and passion and organizing in the church. So for people that don't know that story, how has the transitions where we became the butt of jokes on parody news stories also inspired the church in North Carolina to like take courageous steps of faith that maybe people aren't hearing about?
So what's your question? I'm going to do this a lot. Me and Matt had this back and forth thing.
You were on episode 4 of the podcast. Yes. That was like 950 some ago.
Yes.
But no. So
how did we get here?
Yeah.
We're afraid. People are afraid. I was talking to someone earlier in our earlier meeting. There's a lot of people in the dominant culture that are afraid that their world is ending. They see the world getting browner. Black president. For the first time, people are being exposed to Black Lives Matter, Black resistance, challenging of long-standing injustices, and it's in their face now. Social media, Facebook. And so I think a lot of this, man, is just a real fear that there's a world that's being taken from them. I think this kind of explains some of the, and I'm sure people have other explanations for this, but this kind of explains some of the Trump phenomenon. I was talking with some friends earlier, Greg and Helms Jarrell. Where y'all at? Back there? All right. It's almost like a realized eschatology. So it's like North Carolina's the already, but not yet of America.
Oh, ooh, that'll preach.
Yeah. So it's almost like, America literally could, like the rest, America could look like North Carolina, like in years to come. And that sounds scary to some people. But I think that at the root of it it's a real fear, man. I mean, people.
But it's also a call to faithfulness for communities of faith here.
Yes.
To figure out how you address this situation, the changing dynamics and all that kind of stuff in a way that is life-giving rather than life-denying.
Right. Because, in a crisis, you either fight or flight. Right. I would say that you see communities of faith that are resisting. They're choosing to fight, but fight in a way with the weapons of love, nonviolence, civil disobedience, speaking truth, even questioning their own heritages, their own practices, their own ways of understanding the gospel and the church. So I think there is a growing component. We see this manifest in movements such as the Moral Monday movement, the For Together movement, where under the leadership of Reverend William Barber and many others, we have local leadership here in Charlotte, and people that are just taking their faith and saying, rather than my faith being used as a tool to scare people, but how can the gospel, how can my faith become a tool or a resource rather of liberation? And transformation in our community. So,
well, what's behind that was actually a place that we kind of had our initial first conversation where I had my little theological bromance with you.
Yes.
And we're sitting there, never met before, and find out we're both reading the same historical Jesus books. Right. Reading Marcus Borg, Richard Hersley, and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that fascinated both of us, but I had never even heard the same ideas articulated the same way you were describing them, because my experience was the white Baptist experience of North Carolina, and obviously you were not a white Baptist preacher's kid,
no.
And yet I was it was like a revelatory experience. Like when you have those experiences where someone gives you the patience and grace to recognize things you carry that need to be healed. You were straight up prophetic Jesus in the most loving way that night. And it all started because we nerded out talking about Jesus and empire in historical studies. So can you describe what is it like? What was that conversation do when you then connect it to your community that you're serving and caring for?
Right. That's a good question. One of the things that I talk about is, especially when we had that conversation about the historical Jesus, something that was revelatory for me, and I kind of raise this issue in my own community a lot, is the realization that Jesus did not die a natural death. Right? You would think that, listening to a lot of Christianity, Jesus died for my sins. Right? But when you begin to dig deeper, we see that Jesus was assassinated. That he was crucified, that there was some power that crushed him that we have to pay attention to. What was that? And so one of the things I bring to bear in our community, I open it up for discussion, And to let people know that, Jesus just didn't simply, the language that in the culture I live in, the context that I do a lot of ministry work in, he didn't just simply die. Mm-hmm. That he was assassinated. The way in which Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Mm-hmm. The ways in which a lot of people that called into question the way the world is, and the way the world is, and the way that is and arranged, that benefits the few, the disadvantages of many. It is the system, the power that holds that kind of world together that kills him. And so that's a different way of talking about Jesus in my context.
Yeah.
Right? We think of Jesus, God being really upset with everybody and God killing him instead of us, or Jesus just simply died as some kind of proxy or some kind of way. But there's some very real things that killed Jesus that are very similar to what's happening in our state right now.
Yeah.
Similar forces that want to exclude, forces that want to devalue certain lives, right? And that's some of that right there. Mm-hmm. So,
and there are kind of two sides to this conversation. And before we get to the one that, when we have it, it blows my mind, and I might have to admit that you were right from an argument we had years ago, but obviously that'll get edited out of the podcast. First, I want to help me understand the experience of white privilege.
Help you understand?
Yeah, because here's why that's I think an important question. And
you want me to attend to your fragility?
No, well, Adam Clark, 5 points, Anthony.
That's going to get edited.
That was a zinger. Adam Clark, he's been on the podcast a couple times. He's James Cone's student, and we were having this conversation, and then we were talking about it, and I wanted to kind of move on to the theological part and practical part, and he goes, Tripp, hold on. Before you can ever do theology and race, you have to tend to the pre-theological inheritance of white privilege. Mm. And I'm not sure you're able to see it yet.
Wow.
So let's talk about that. And that's called A Really Good Friend. Right. And that's why he's writing the Guide to Salvation in the Homebrewed Christianity series, because he gets to tell a story about where he saved me. And as a Southerner who, family is as Southern as it gets. We deep fried chicken.
Right.
I realized that there is a pre-theological humming of your ancestry within you that you can never reconcile with or try to move towards wholeness till you at least admit it's there. And I think the desire for more progressive communities of faith that are in privilege is not to deal with that and then just hey, could you tell me what I'm supposed to do to be the good white guy that helps you out?
Right.
And so that's why pausing long enough to know even what it is that we carry and haven't examined looks and feels like if you aren't, I don't know.
Right. I think, this is something I've been thinking about lately. This kind of a thought experiment is you hear a lot of talk about systemic racism. Mm-hmm. There's just this larger understanding of how racism works, white privilege, and how racism is prejudice plus power. And but I think that when we're dealing with America, in the United States in particular, we have to understand that this reality is really, if I can use, we got some theology nerds here, right? This is nerd out, right?
You can nerd out. I can nerd out. Geek out.
So for me, racism is systemic, but it's also cosmological.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? It's embedded in the very structure of Western civilization. Matter of fact, it's actually what helped create civilization. Mm-hmm. If we could do a creative version of Genesis chapter 1, when God says God, spoke the world into existence and let there be light, That's kind of how Western civilization works, but they kind of added the kind of race thing into it, right? And so it's not something we can just wish away or close our blind eyes to, or just kind of ignore, or even think that it's something that we can just deal with on a personal level or prejudice level, or even at the systemic level. But we have to understand that there is no separating American society from white supremacy. This is what helps make it.
Yeah.
This is what American democracy is. So it's not like America caught a bad cold.
Well, how much of it is that?
This is America.
How much of it is the way we tell our story?
Yeah.
I remember one of the things Richard Horsley says in Jesus and Empire that was our initial conversation, is he said, where the story begins often tells you how the story concludes.
Yes.
And if you tell the story of America and it begins with a lamp not hidden under a bushel up on a hill showing freedom and liberty juice all over the place, and forgets there were humans here before we showed up, and that the economic mechanisms of our country involved moving people across continents, then it's a cover up that you sing the Star Spangled Banner over.
Yes. And speaking of which, I think we have to attend to, the songs, the symbols, the stories, like you said. Even the Star Spangled Banner. I actually preached a message last week in our church in Salisbury about what happens when the Holy Spirit sings. And so I talked about the power of song. And it's interesting that our national song, while it's, I love it when Whitney Houston and Marvin Gaye sing it. It is just really beautiful when they sing.
But if you had to pick one.
When Marvin Gaye.
Yeah,
my wife will get upset with me right now, but because she loves Whitney Houston. But the song is so violent. Bombs bursting in the air, body parts being blown all over the place. I mean, death and destruction and violence. This is our national song. And our national symbol is a bird of prey that feeds on dead bodies and smaller things. And so this is a part of our national origin. This is a part of the mythology, the song, the story of America. That doesn't mean that we have to hate America. I'm just saying we got to be able to tell these difficult truths like this. Our songs, our symbols, our founding cosmology is rooted in violence and power over smaller people, or people that have less, quote, power. And so that's something that we have to attend to. And that's difficult, especially being a Christian in America, right? Because so much of our Christianity is rooted and intermingled into the DNA of the evolution of what we call this. And the thing is, don't get me wrong, like I serve. I always feel like I have to do this sort of apology or this kind of retraction. I serve my country. I serve in the United States Navy. I love this country. I love apple pie. But at
with
the
or without ice cream.
Right. To get past those kind of what?
I said with or without ice cream.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No ice cream.
No ice cream.
Yeah. So
focus on that fruit.
The pre-theological work is to attend to that stuff, man. To be honest and speak truth. Especially for those of us who stand in the tradition of Jesus and the Hebrew prophets. Man, did y'all read the Hebrew prophets? They were crazy.
No, that's really dangerous.
They would just challenge the mythology that Israel had believed about itself when it's in captivity in Babylon. Right? Moses had to challenge the people when they came out of Egypt. Y'all got too much Egypt in you. You got too much Babylon in you. So as Christians, we got to be able to, those of faith, those who are people of conscience, we have to pay attention to and be discerning and be interrogating to the ways that we have internalized beliefs, practices, all that makes it hard to get past the pre-theological, what'd you say, humming?
Yeah. I mean, that was my experience. And the second or third time I went out talking about the book, I spoke in Missouri and at a conference, and Alton Pollard was speaking there as well, and he's the president of Howard University, but was a professor at Wake Forest in African American religion and history. I'd heard him lecture and decided I wanted to go to Wake Forest for Divinity School, and then he took a job at Emory between my acceptance. So the first homebrewed Christianity podcast at Foothills Brewing Company in Winston-Salem was Alton Pollard, and I didn't turn the recorder on. So it actually wasn't the first episode, but he was there. See, we have multiple attestation up in this piece.
That's what's up. Out of mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses.
Yeah. So, like if you're going and you're like speaking at 3 things in a row, you only half pay attention if there's a bunch of people at it, because you only are half at the event, and then I'm going from there to Arkansas, where I was going to preach. Well, I realized Alton Pollard's there, and I'm like, oh, this is so awesome. Like in the same day, I'm going to get to hear Alton Pollard talk and Catherine Keller. So it's like the eschatological banquet for Tripp. Catherine Keller's like, I call her just Catherine Keller, so her initials are JC, if you know what I mean. Google that junk. You won't regret it. And if you're smart, you'll peer pressure Chris to be like, can you give me her digits so she can come hang out? And I will. And you was amazing. Anyway, so I'm sitting there. I see him and we start talking, and I tell him the story, and he's like, "You mean that thing you invited me to? You're still doing it? It's on the front of a book?" And I was like, "Yeah." I went to Wake Forest because of your lecture on unconscious racism for white people in the South, and he was like, "You showed up at that thing?" I was like, "Yeah." I started crying in the middle of it, and I'm against crying. That was prior to having children. Once you have children, like a really cheesy commercial starts to cry. My son had lots of ear tubes and stuff, so we watched the movie Cars so many times. Like if I just hear the opening soundtrack, I'm just like, he stopped and he went and got King, who was crashing. He's like, I don't want the cup without my friends. It's nothing. And I'm just like crying like a baby. But this was before having children, when I was a real man, able to deny my feelings and any of my connections that are embarrassing or complicit. So I was a dude then.
Did Pollard like Cars too?
Yeah, he did not like Cars 2. Cars 2, you militarize friendship.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm saying? You add in James Bond car and start shooting junk up. What's that about? You have really cool car stories for kids and friendship wins, and you're like, you know what we need? James Bond. You can wait till you're 14 for James Bond.
That's it, man.
I was an aside. Sorry. But
anyway,
so we're talking, and they're like, well, you should just go ahead and introduce him. You should tell this story because you had already done the podcast stuff there. And that night was the live podcast during the event. And I'd done my little book talk. So I give the introduction, and I sit down on the front row and I got my recorder on, and he proceeds to do one of the most powerful talks I've ever seen. The first 20 minutes were 30-second silhouettes on African American people under 30 who were killed by employees of the United States in the last year.
Oh, wow.
And then he proceeded to re-articulate Micah's pronouncements, where, against this nation. Right. And then, but you, O Israel, and they didn't know that was coming because they didn't know he was a real prophet yet.
Right.
The ones that you keep on the payroll don't do the, O Israel, you get to go last line. And then he said, but here's the thing. You intelligent, progressive, postmodern types, y'all keep using Europeans to try to philosophically account for your original sin as white Americans. And a French deconstructionalist isn't going to help you deconstruct white privilege. And a German overcoming guilt for the Holocaust isn't going to fix it. And then he proceeds to just shame us all by remembering in original languages all the different European postmodern philosophers translated for us with their little taglines. And he goes, and so I would like to do is conclude this with a little parabolic sermon called The Endarkenment. And then he tells the story, and it's like so powerful. And this is like post-children, so I cry. And I'm like, shh. Why he's telling this story? I've been in California. Like, they just think Southerners are weird. You don't normally have the heritage of the South alive. And I'm here, and at the same time, I'm realizing that the next day I'm going to drive 4 hours past the 287 acres the Fuller family had as a plantation when Hiram Shaw Fuller, my name is George Hiram Fuller III, was a general in the Confederate Army and a senator from Arkansas. And it was like the pre-theological hummings just rushed in.
Right.
And I was like, I just have to like sit there long enough, because I consciously in California, my southernness was more a joke about my accent than recognition of what I've inherited and how to let that guilt not be something that keeps me from acting, but inspires confession and transformation. But you have to let it come to the surface.
Right. There's a piece within Dante's Inferno where Virgil, there's a character being guided into the underworld, right? And that's what you just described reminded me of that. Because there's a lot under that history, that family history, that genealogy, where I land in the politics and the economics, to really take that living history. And that's the thing about it. It's hard to do that because we think that history is not living, that it's not present with us, you know.
It's like the myth of the blank slate.
Yeah, top of the rush. Yeah. And so it sounds like what Dr. Pollard was doing is bringing that very much real living history, like a griot, like an elder in the black community would do, a storyteller would, good storytelling preacher would do, is to make that history living for the moment, to bring it into the moment, to say, you can't escape this. You got to deal with this. You got to wrestle with this now. This shapes now, not just back then. And that's powerful, man. I wish I was there for that moment.
And in what I find, it's like it's simultaneously thrilling and threatening. So like, what would it be like for us who benefit from white privilege to tempt the gospel enough that transformation could happen? And what if it's times like this where you can't stop denying that it lingers, that we get, like when Jeremiah goes to the people and goes, well, I went out to the potter and the clay fell over, and then he tried to work it back, but it kept falling over. And if it keeps falling over, you just pitch it out. But you do know there's another option. You could trust that it's okay to have the lumps you have if you trust the potter's hand, and then God will repent. And you won't get destruction. You'll get beautiful art. And at some point, I think the American church in all of its parts has to deal with the inheritance we've been denying.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I've been profoundly challenged by our friendship is the way in which you've opened up to me how the flip side of it, there's also burdens on the other side.
Yeah.
And maybe you could share a bit about that, because I think understanding that gives like steps or ways in which we could start to have fruitful partnerships across lines that are very clear but not very proud.
Right. Well, a couple of things. One, privilege. And it's easy to stop at guilt. We all know this. Anybody that's been doing any kind of race work, anti-racism work, we know that the temptation is to stop at white guilt, or any kind of guilt for that matter. But the goal for me is to walk into what I call mutual liberation.
Yeah.
Right. Because the thing is, if you're trapped in guilt, you're not liberated either. even if you do have certain privileges, actually, you're in bondage as well. And so the goal is mutual liberation. It is what, Paul talks about this in Philippians, right? He says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, right? And the great hymn that, Christ kind of sheds off his divine privilege. And I think that's a part of it. How do we shed that? How do we use whatever privilege? As a male, how do I use my male privilege? As a heterosexual, how do I use my hetero privilege with those who struggle with disenfranchisement and exclusion and devaluation in my community? As a black male, dealing with my sisters in my community, how do I use my privilege in such a way? But there's the other side to that. One of the things I do in our community, I like the word that my brother used earlier, Ben. He said contextual Bible study. We were doing a study in the Gospel of Mark for a year in our community. And there's a scene in the Gospel of Mark chapter 5, where Jesus counters Legion. Mm-hmm. Right? And Legion, Jesus on the boat, he makes landfall. Jesus jumps out the boat, and immediately he encounters this man who's demon possessed. And according to the narrative, this man stays in the graveyard. He cuts himself. He's in the midst of death, nihilism, and despair. And so literally a way to interpret that is that here's this man in a community in the 10 city area whose community has been occupied by Roman military political presence. This man becomes a microcosm of what's happening in his community. He embodies what's happening into his community. Mm-hmm. He lives into himself what the Romans are doing to his community. He does to himself what the Romans do to his community. So that's why in certain contexts, people don't understand why when certain racial injustices happen, people burn down their own communities. And there's some trick about that, because some of what they burn down ain't really theirs anyway. Right? It's owned by other people. So that's a part of the conversation that's missed.
But that phenomena is something that happens at the social scale, but also the individual scale.
Yeah. So,
why is it that children who are taken advantage of when they're young refuse to deal with it in a way that they get to enjoy the bodies God gave them? There's those cycles where you internalize a violent story about you and then perform it so it's true.
Well, there's something that we don't talk about is a lot. And we're good at, I want to say good at, but we talk a lot about white supremacy, white privilege, systemic racism, and these things are very important. But there's another piece of this conversation that, as an African-American pastor, and for those who lead within historically marginalized communities, have to realize that there's ways in which we have internalized stuff, right? The way that we've internalized white supremacy. And so that's why you see a lot of Afrocentricity. You see a lot of folk affirming black culture, the stories, the culture making, the art, the history, going back to the motherland, to Akibalon in Africa, right? As the Greeks called it, Africa was Akibalon, African. And so there's ways that I have to attend to. In many ways, if I can be frank, there's work that I have to do, that I can't be too preoccupied with the fragility of white people. Can I be honest?
You're allowed.
I can't be, or other people of color can't be solely responsible for the enlightenment of white people. Right? Mm-hmm. We can be conversation partners. But there has to be a moment, though, that you have to take your own liberation seriously. And not rely on me or others or people that look like me. And so there's work that I have to do in my own community. 500, 600 years of a civilization that told us that we were not human. And then we're told after 60, 40, 50, 60 years, just get over that. What's a little slavery and dehumanization between friends? And we're told that has no bearing on our present moment.
Yeah.
When you look at the nihilism and the despair, I can't tell you how many times I've been places with my own people that look like me, people whose skin has been kissed by the sun, and they have to apologize to white folks for speaking their mind. That hurts. That makes me mad. Or if I'm in a room with other brothers and sisters in a room full of white folks, and I start talking this language, and it gets really uncomfortable, and they're really worried about what you think about what I'm saying. Or some of y'all. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So there's a certain courage, not just in the white world, as Du Bois would say, W. Du Bois would say,
Yeah.
but there's a certain amount of courage even amongst my own people. And we got a lot of courageous people that look like me. Trust me, there's a lot of us here, but there's a whole lot of us who are just as scared for different reasons. So
the story of Legion, how does Jesus' encounter with him serve as a biblical narrative to re-envision prophetic ministry for you?
Yeah. Jesus is on the boat. Mark says it, right? He's on the boat. He makes landfall. And if any of you know, if you're informed about ancient Christian symbolism, the boat represents who? The church, the community of disciples. So Jesus is the presence of the church landing into the community or making landfall. Jesus jumps out the boat and is immediately confronted with somebody who has experienced oppression. And the first thing that Jesus does is ask, what is your name? He names the oppression. Don't sugarcoat it. And notice Jesus asks the question. He doesn't tell Legion what his oppression is. Did you catch that? Jesus doesn't say, well, Legion, I think this is your problem.
I've tried that with my wife before. It doesn't work.
Yeah, that never works.
I know. It's like I should have paid attention to Jesus.
Yeah. And so he names the oppression, and then Jesus begins the work of what I call, in my context, the way I read it, it may be different in your context. I actually wrote a chapter about this in a book on Emergent folks with Brian McLaren and those guys, about how that works in the white world, maybe. But for me, a community that I work in was predominantly African American. This is a story of decolonization.
Yeah.
How do I let go of the false lies, the false stories, the limiting, self-limiting beliefs that a lot of my people in my community have been conditioned to believe about themselves, that we are slaves, that we've not been agents of history. And we got some of our people that understand it, but we got swaths of people in my community that don't get that yet. But then for white folks, the way this works is there's a decolonization that white people have to go through too, is that dealing with the race work, dealing with the anti-racism, learning how to shed privilege, learning how to do the work of mutual liberation and solidarity, and learning the work of deep compassion, which requires proximity, which requires you putting yourself in a place where you could actually get hit by the forces that actually impact the communities that you're concerned about. The gospel calls us to that. Yeah. Jesus says, you follow me, take up your cross. Did he not? Dietrich Bonhoeffer said this. He says, when Christ calls a man, he bids him first come and die. And so in the story of Legion, Jesus makes landfall and he names the forces, and he names it with such specificity that it could get Jesus killed himself. He says, Legion. Y'all know what a legion was. So Jesus gives specificity. He doesn't say this kind of hallmark generalization of things like, oh, we just don't like each other. You know, I don't see color. Right? No.
And
Legion.
What do you make of like the two parts at the end of that story that are exegetical openings, are sending Legion of the demons, often the pigs for a bath.
Yes.
Which are simultaneously a cash item for the Gentile occupiers.
Right.
Because obviously Jewish people weren't down for bacon, which is why the Gentiles like Jesus' reorganization of certain parts of Torah.
Yes.
I mean, like, how would you even have Baptist pig pickings if we hadn't fixed that? But remembering that Jesus was Jewish. And
So Jesus' disruption disrupts the political economy.
yeah. And it's an economy built for who? The occupiers.
Yes.
Because none of the oppressed were going to touch that junk.
No.
And then you have the one who has been released wants to go with Jesus, and he gets sent home.
Yeah.
He
And what does
said,
Jesus do?
no, go home.
Right. Jesus says, no, go back. And then later in the story, when he goes back, liberation is spread. Liberation is going viral. So this is why, this is interesting, even in our context, for those of you who may be going, there may be a cadre, even some of you in this room that may be going through this kind of work, liberation work, anti-racism work. You're being liberated because there's others that need to be liberated. You're like leaven, right? Jesus said the kingdom of God is like leaven, right?
You do have to remind that everyone in here doesn't read the Bible all the time. So
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a preacher, so.
I know. Yes.
Yeah, so all of you here who are engaged in this kind of work are like leaven for this community, for your church, for this city, hell, for this state, right? And so, this liberation. So Jesus says, nah, man, don't stay with me. Don't hang out with me. Go on back to your city, right? And I love the passage, and I think Mark is very intentional about this. He says, and when Jesus does this, right, when he exorcises this thing out of him, he says, and he was clothed and in his right mind. And that's one of the things that I'm learning is that oppression and the oppressor, neither of them may be in their right mind. It's not like white folks are in their right mind and other people aren't. All of us, if we're trapped up in this garment of oppression, all of us have been broken and twisted in ways deep down that we may not even recognize. And that's why it's sometimes hard to have these kind of conversations.
Mm-hmm. So and you backed into planning a church. I remember you telling me, you were like, I'm like way too missional and enlightened, and I got prophetic. I got my activism. I got my job. I'm not going to be doing no church planning. And then Jesus was like, check this. Yes. And then we're speaking in a thing together, and you're like, so I'm starting a church. And you're like, Trip, so I'm going to start a church. I'm like, what? You're starting a church? You're like, yeah, it's like a Pentecostal storefront church. You're what? Yeah, I mean, the Holy Ghost.
Right.
And I was like one of those, we were at, Inhabit in Seattle, and I got to meet your wife for the first time. And I was like, oh my goodness, if Anthony Smith is going to preach on Sundays, then Jesus has to be involved, because you were pretty convinced for a long time that the church had a lot of preaching and a lot of singing, but it had, and this is one of my favorite lines from you. And you can demythologize it if you want. And you were like, I can't go to church all the time because they haven't learned to sing the blues correctly. And I was like, I like blues music, so I think I appreciate this. But I remember we started to have a conversation, and you go, no, it's not like that, Trip.
Right.
So when you end up getting the point of like doing what you had decided you weren't going to do in church planning, and like, what does it look like to plant a church where you get to sing the blues? This was like the only question I'd thought of before we started. So if it's bad, I'm really depressed.
Yeah,
I was like, I'm looking forward to asking Anthony.
Right. It looks like there's a worship song. Well, it's not really a worship. There's a song we sing in our Sunday morning gatherings called Rope City.
Rope City.
Yeah, it's the nickname of Salisbury because Salisbury had a powerful, very prominent lynching culture in the early part of the 20th century. And in the black community, it was called Rope City because of the lynchings. And there's a long story about me and some local community organizers trying to get to the bottom of that history, how many roadblocks we've had trying to address that history in our own community. It's kind of funny, sad at the same time, tragic, comic. But in this song, it talks about lynching. It talks about the really brutal history. It talks about the reasons why despair and a lot of the bad things that have happened and continue to happen in our community. But there's also the not yet portion of it, the hopefulness that we may have, the hopefulness of a hope city versus a rope city. So we try to sing songs to our community to open us up, open our imagination up, to see the reality of history and how it's still present, how it's a living history. But also the gospel calls us to newness.
Yeah.
How do we live into that newness? And so we do things like, I'm trying to think some of the things that we do that may have grabbed people's attention in our own community. But we do a lot of work together across race. We just don't hold services together where we wash each other's feet and we sing some songs together.
You mean that metaphorically?
I sing some gospel, you sing some CCM or something like that.
No, I mostly do Pearl Jam and stuff like that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, they have to wear flannel when they sing for me to do it.
Oh, okay. But we do work together. We have those deep conversations, those painful conversations together. Like, it wouldn't be weird in our church for me to say the things that I'm saying right now. Right? It wouldn't catch some of the people in our community off guard. They'd be like, okay, this is normal conversation now. And so that's part of that conversation. That's the way it unfolds. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it doesn't. It makes me think, what does the prophetic voice look like towards like one of the things I find that could help us move forward is when we admit that we're all simultaneously like the oppressor and oppressed in different ways, and that we've internalized weird things, and somehow if we don't just completely binary it, then there's opportunities of mutual support, transformation, and grace that could happen. And I remember like our podcast we did at Wild Goose not too long ago.
The one I won.
No, I didn't think you won then. I've reevaluated it since then. But you aren't supposed to say it on the podcast. Where you were describing the ways in which the flip side of white privilege are internalized in African American men, and what does it look like? And you did this trick, which I know is only persuasive to nerds. And this is a small side. Augustine, who is the most famous theologian after Paul, he's an African theologian, but when white people paint him, his skin is significantly lighter. Right. Tells us he takes the story of the Israelite people coming out of Egypt, and Pharaoh, who's just like freaked out, is like, you can go ahead and take the gold, which are all like melted into like little trinkets to other deities. And Augustine said, that's what you do anytime you find good ideas, good things going on, and they're formed towards false idols. You don't ditch the gold, you melt it down and you reform it. And you tell this story, and I don't even know what the point has to be after that. Like the sheer nerd value of an Augustine callback at like 11 o'clock at Wild Goose late in the evening. Like, I'm like, Anthony's going to win. I'm just not going to give in.
Well, we have to tell the story different.
Yeah.
I mean, like, one of the things that I do is I tell people, for a lot of people, America was the promised land. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people that look like me, America has been Egypt. That's just real. The Pilgrims and, the story, right? They left Britain, that was Egypt, and they came to America,
If you call them buckleheads, it works better.
Oh. Well, I don't want to be too hard on the Pilgrims. But
it's like if your pants fall down, you have an extra belt on your head.
It's how we tell this, right? It's how we tell the story. Even going back to the church fathers from Augustine, I mean, it's where you start. And I think you have to be conscious of where you're starting the story. You have to be conscious of how you're telling the story, and even why you're telling that story. Do you even know why you're telling this story? What does that justify? That's their postmodern sensibility there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for some, this is the promised land. This is the land flowing with milk and honey. For others, we're trying to make it that, turn Egypt into promised land.
So what does that look like given the economic situation and all the types of systemic situation for the people you're ministering to?
Right. Well, I mean, I don't have the luxury to wait for white people to get a clue. So
That's
what
tweetable.
we talk about in my community is asset-based community development. We talk about, what are your gifts? What wisdom do you have? What passions do you have? What limited resources do you have? And how can we work together? You know, so there's a whole lot of conversation in my community about business incubation, entrepreneurship with our youth, the arts, creativity, innovation. I don't know, you know, for some people this might be like, you know, kind of crass, kind of capitalist language, whatever. But I'm like, yo.
Yeah, it's just definitely, you're not feeling enough of the burn.
Yeah. I ain't gonna trip me in that one, man.
It was just a little temptation.
Yeah, I know.
You prayed not to get led into it.
I know, right? Yeah. I'm probably feeling the burn right now, man.
So look, here's what I find funny. I remember we were having this, and I get it's an attempt to win a conversation at Wild Goose. I go Z-Jack Bartleby solution, which you can all Google if you want to, but it's really ridiculous, and I just didn't want to lose an argument because our bromance is built over arguing. And you know, one of the greatest things about having friends that you can argue about stuff is you're able to differentiate you from your ideas. You're not your ideas. Now pause for a second. Now think of that person who you're going to see at the next family gathering. You know, the one that likes to share things on Facebook just to demonstrate the total depravity is not a Calvinist fallacy. It occasionally lingers on, like, you know, that dude who's just like, man, Fox News is like the liberal mouthpiece. And you're like, oh my God. Like, the only thing, like when you're in California and this election's going on and your friends who are all like every religion, doing PhDs in religion together, and you're their one Southerner, every time something comes up, they were like, who votes for Trump? And I was like, oh, the people my granddad has breakfast with.
Wait, you know what?
It's just, you shouldn't let Waffle House run the country. And
And you know what, man? I actually, you know, I have a confession, man. I really have not.
You like Waffle House?
I love Waffle House.
That's what I thought we were. With pecans or not?
That's like a meetup spot in our community, right?
Praise the Lord.
Yes.
Who wants to go to Waffle House when this is done? That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
But I've been so entrenched, and I have friends who are here, they know, like, I've been so enmeshed in my community, man. Like, I have not done a good job of paying attention to national politics.
Well, your blood pressure thinks you.
I think I should. I feel bad now since we're talking about you asking me if I feel the burn.
No.
I mean, I think, you know.
It's just acid reflux. Whatever you want.
Yeah.
But I do have I had one. There's one other topic before zombies I wanted to talk to you about.
Yes, we talk about zombies. I can talk about zombies all day.
I know. But I was really just wanting to pitch my article to you to get feedback. I'm not interested.
This building would not withstand a level 3 attack.
But if it's level 2, given that they welcomed your church into a brewery, you can come here. But if it's level 3, you come and you get growler fills and go to safe places. Because if you know you're going out, you may as well thin your blood so it ends faster. Is that in there?
I think so. Somewhere. Yeah.
It's like in the bro version of How to Survive a Zombie Apocalypse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, Pentecost.
Yes.
I talked a little bit about it earlier today, knowing I was going to get to talk to you, and I was like, I want to talk about practicing Pentecost up in this piece with Anthony, because we would talk about practicing Pentecost, and then we would start talking about it, and we'd be like all intellectual. That's how like over-intelligent, middle-class white dudes with multiple graduate degrees talk about Pentecost.
Right, right.
And so it's like, since that happened, I became friends with Amos Young.
Oh, sweet. I love his work.
And we've hung out a couple times. He came into my school and taught, and we're talking, and he really ruined a problem for me. Like, I mean, it's causing me significant psychological issues. He said the renewalist movement, which is what he describes as the inbreaking of this new deepness of the Spirit as the church recognizes its global diversity of voices.
In the main line.
Like all over the place.
Okay.
Like there are expressions in mainline. There are
Right.
the charismatic movement. There's a Pentecostal movement. There are Catholics that are then like going hybrid with their liturgy with African traditional religions here. And then he's like, all you're getting is that people there are so packed full of the Spirit that they can't just talk about Jesus the same way white people learn to talk about it and enforce it in their systematic theology text. And I read your book, Trip, and you are a closeted renewalist. And this is sneaky what he's doing right here, because he teaches at Fuller Theological Seminary, and he's already getting dangerous by such a statement. He said, you use really naive dismissals about like not talking in tongues and weird things like that to dismiss the fact that you and a lot of people you love and are connected to are part of the Holy Spirit doing Pentecost in ways that empire, hierarchy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, and all those type of things can't contain. And I was like, amen. But I'm still uncomfortable just with like the label. And so, and why I said it, then one of the students that was there, he goes, like you don't have to be a Pentecostal. You just got to practice Pentecost. And then all of a sudden in my head, there was Anthony. Because one of the first podcasts I ever listened to before I started a podcast was one you were on called Practicing Pentecost. So if you're looking at our situation today, and Pentecost is a practice, what possibilities does glossolalia give us as a church to speak gospel tongues that move beyond the binaries we've been trapped in with our inheritance?
Right. In Mark 16, Jesus says that they will speak with new tongues. Right. So for me, Pentecost is us learning together how to speak a language together that is not as much shaped by empire, by the things that prevent us from having true friendship with each other, true love with each other. And so Pentecost is, I believe, a move of the Spirit, because I practice glossolalia. People always ask me what my theological tradition is. I always say I'm a storefront Pentecostal. Actually, I literally got filled with the Holy Ghost in the back of a volunteer firehouse outside of Seattle, Washington in 1994. And for me, it was a very profound religious experience shared by millions of people, a lot of people all over the planet. And I'm sure there's people there say there's some psychological reasons for that. But I want you to read a commentary by Richard Horsley. Horsley has a commentary on Corinthians. And when he breaks down theologically what's happening, not just exegesis in the text, but also what's happening in the majority world with Pentecostalism, it's some powerful stuff. And one of the things I remember Horsley saying, because he helped me trying to understand this, why does glossolalia tend to happen primarily amongst oppressed and marginalized people? Because the Spirit gives us language for a world that's different from the world that we experience every day. It taps us into a reality that's different, that's hopeful, that's life-giving, that's comfortable, comforting, I should say, not comfortable, comforting in a world that seems to be organized against you. Mm-hmm. And so it's something about that. I don't know what it is. It's something about, Paul talks about that it builds up our most holy faith.
Yeah.
And so for me, talking in new tongues is about talking in a new language. It's talking the new language of the erupting kingdom of God, the invasive, the disruptive kingdom of God. Is talking within a new register. Aside from the social political language and words that we use now that shape us, that condition us, that keep us from each other. Because, when they come out on the day of Pentecost in Acts, they come out and it says they're speaking, these people from different places, they're speaking in this language. They all can understand each other from different places. And I think that's when we know that we're into a Pentecost moment, when we can really begin to hear each other. And we'll begin to really deal with the things that prevent us from hearing each other.
Mm-hmm. And an element of that's always struck me, the moment you allow Pentecost to be something other than a story to demythologize so you don't have to get uncomfortable.
Right.
Which is my personal favorite way of dealing with it. But is that Pentecost is God's insistence that the world as it is stands under a graceful judgment for what it could be. And what in the resurrection God promises it will be. And that so many of us have an ideological fidelity to religions like nationalism, white supremacy, our economic privilege, and things like that, that we don't become like Jesus heretics.
Well, check this out. Could it be that one of the ways that the Spirit is moving in our culture is our obsession with the zombie apocalypse?
Oh.
Here's why.
You see that?
Check this out.
The Holy Spirit is orchestrating the transition. He was like, you know what, Dex?
I am Pentecostal.
Apocalypse.
We know the movement of
zombie
the Spirit.
style.
And so,
do you like Fear the Walking Dead?
It's all right. But check this out. I think with a lot of this, man, I think human beings in our culture realize that if we keep living the way we live on this planet, this is what's going to happen. It may not be zombies. It actually may be something else. An uninhabitable planet. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what I see with the obsession with zombies. I think people know. I think human beings collectively know that the way we are living, aside from all that ideology and all our political posturing and justifications for ignoring climate change and massive injustice and inequality and sustainability issues, I think human beings know that we cannot continue the course the way that we live on this planet.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what the zombie part of it is. I mean, people just like entertainment and people, things chomping on flesh and all that, right? Just the gore of it and the entertaining value of it. But I think people see. I think human beings know. I think the Spirit is allowing us to see that if we continue on this course of life, this way of life. I was reading a fact the other day. I'm sure many of you know this, that we currently consume at a rate that requires 1.5 planets, maybe 2 planets. That is scary.
Yeah, that's why you should just stop reading halfway through that article.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So hence the zombie apocalypse. So what you want to say about zombies now?
No, I think that's helpful because one of the reasons that zombies are so fascinating to me as opposed to other like monsters is like, where do aliens come from? Where do ghosts come from? All those type of things, they come from outside and they like invade, and then you have a problem. Zombies are a product of human hubris in all the different versions. Like one, you have like play with genetics, zombie outbreak. Like you get a little new cappy, zombie outbreak. You get a little like designer human, zombie outbreak. There's always a product of human beings attempting to not become something different by harnessing power to then change themselves. And then one of my favorite parts of all the zombie versions about The Walking Dead is that everyone is already contaminated.
Yes.
The Walking Dead is every living person.
Yes.
Like, you don't figure out how to live in apocalypse until you already figure out that you're simultaneously dead and alive. Or Luther talks about saint and sinner. Or stardust and the breath of God. Like, there's this dichotomy that the zombie apocalypse puts. Like, you want to know what the problem is? The origin is not some external thing that shows up that you got to get machismo and conquer at Independence Day style. Right. The problem is lurking right underneath your skin. And the sad thing is that your zombie jumps out and bites the very people you love. And Paul talks about this junk like in Romans, where he's like, well, you know what you want to do? And you know what you're supposed to do, but you don't do that junk. What you do is you try to just like eat the brains of the person you married. And then you're like, I didn't want to do that. It's my bad. I got a zombie inside of me. And that's all good because you're a slave to the flesh and you're a slave to the spirit. But praise be God that God raised Jesus from the dead. And one of the crazy things about like this zombie anthropology is like once we admit that we're like walking dead, then it's like way easier to give grace to the people that piss you off. Because we are under this myth in the Enlightenment that human beings make rational choices regularly. And then what do? Someone's a jerk to you and you don't go like, they were tired, they were frustrated, they weren't thinking. You go, earlier today they were thinking about me. And they strategically planned this entire thing to let me know how worthless I am. Like, we create these weird stories where every other human's rational and being a jerk, while we also know, we're like, my bad, I didn't mean it that way. And they're like, oh, no, you did. What you wanted to tell me is that you don't appreciate anything I do in this life and contribute to your world. And you just want to walk me. You're like, no, I didn't mean I was just, I wasn't actually, I didn't know what you said.
I've never heard this commentary, man. I love it, dude.
And so, like, to me, there's a sense that like, what you end up doing in the zombie apocalypse, basically in episodes like 1 through 60 in the Walking Dead comic book, is you want to make sure that the zombies are external to you until you like end up in a situation where you find out that they're actually existing in you. And what happens throughout the comic? They come up with weird narratives where the person gotten contaminated by someone outside. And then they finally realize someone just dies a natural death and then it comes up and tries to eat somebody.
Yeah, shame.
And they go, oh, junk.
We're all
contaminated. I think the fact that we're all zombies like gives you like a chance to realize that that's my new way of explaining depravity. We're all contaminated.
We're all zombified. Right?
I didn't say total depravity. It's a way of understanding depravity.
But that's think about it though. I mean, there's so many different ways that we are shaped and conditioned. That in some ways we participate, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The podcast.
Knowingly, yes, the podcast. Knowingly or unknowingly in some kind of injustice. Mm-hmm. Something that is not for life at some level.
And you'll build a giant wall, steal a bunch of guns, pull a bunch of oil outside of cars to build a giant wall to find out that you were the problem and you just ate your kid.
Yeah, there we go.
And like...
And a wall won't protect you from the zombie apocalypse either.
What if it's a huge wall?
That's not going to help you either.
All right. So do what?
Go ahead.
Well, and the other part of it is Marshall McLuhan, technology theorist, and all that kind of stuff. And just Google him later. One of the things he talked about the transformation of zombie mythology out of kind of its historical origins in Haiti into the Americas is zombie mythology is what American hegemony has to do to imagine a world in which it's not in charge.
Yeah.
Like one in which democracy, nation states, and capitalism aren't in charge and we are on top. We can't imagine a different order.
We can't imagine a civilization without us being in charge.
So instead,
everything has to go to crap.
And we're working on that.
All the reality systems break down. Everybody, there's no other democracy, no other civilization, no other place where people have economy and politics. If we can't be in charge, then there has to be a zombie apocalypse. And by the way, isn't it interesting that after 2008, we've had more end of the world movies than anything that I've ever seen?
It was like the last time the Lakers won the championship. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's when President Barack Obama became president. Right, you notice this? Like, there's been more movies of post-apocalyptic realities than I can even count. Right, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, Cordell West the other day said they had to bring back Independence Day and they kicked the black guy out of the movie. It's probably because Will Smith is better at deciding what movies to be in, but nonetheless, it proves the point.
And there's more movies of the White House being blown up, too, than never before.
Yeah.
Like, literally just blown up. Like, there's been several of them in the last 8 years. You know,
a black guy moves in, the White House gets blown up.
Yeah, the White House gets blown up. White House down.
Well,
that might have been a white president, but
the ironic thing is none of us remember. I know Morgan Freeman was president in
one of those. Yeah. Can't remember which one it was.
And so I'm doing the companion podcast for National Geographic to the Story of God with Morgan Freeman, and during the kind of like initial interview with him about the whole process, I had like a set of questions, that are unrelated to a travel documentary about world religions. And because I just wanted to ask him, because he'd played God before and the president. So I was like, Morgan, you played God or the president. Which one was harder to prepare for? And he said, well, I'd been the voice of God before I had been God on screen with brown skin. But I had already seen how the audience responds to a president with black skin, so I was more worried about that one. But he said it with this really sweet voice. Yeah. And I was like, I was thinking I was going to get a joke, and you just got real.
Right. Well, speaking of God with brown skin, as a plug, there's a great South African movie called Son of Man. And it's one of the few depictions of the Jesus story with a man playing brown skin. It's very powerful. So if you get a chance, check it out. It's called Son of Man. It's in South Africa. So,
all right.
I just want to put it out there.
So everyone thank Anthony for showing up, and make sure you say, ladies and gentlemen, theologians of all shapes, sizes, IQ, and all, pints in to the evening. You get to experience something very special. What happens when your senior minister discovers that he gets to respond to questions his friend from undergrad, who may or may not have pioneered a game involving beverages to the Left Behind movie, as a BSU Bible study activity, asks some questions. But we're not discussing that. We're also not discussing Terry Michael and Glenn Jonas, Adam. I was seeing them just Wednesday in Raleigh, and I was reminded of this time that right before BSU, the Campbell University fountain changed colors.
Yeah, it did.
You have to use the microphone, Ben.
Yeah, it did change colors.
It did change colors. And I remember there was a moment where the campus minister told us there's a difference between lying and stopping talking.
Yeah, subtle difference.
Yeah. And that maybe you should finish a story in 10 years. And so I was talking to Dr. Jonas, head of the religion department at Campbell University. And I said to him, well, I'm going to have a microphone. And Ben Boswell, recently installed. He's coming up for your installation, he told me.
Yeah, he'll be
But
here.
you aren't letting him talk, and now I know why.
Absolutely not. No,
you're
he can't speak.
You can come, Glenn, but you aren't talking.
No.
But he told me I should give you the opportunity, since it's been 10 years and we're old now, to explain how the Campbell University fountain of ever-flowing Jesus love turned green right before a Baptist Student Union gathering in which a 5-point Calvinist who was very vocal about his hatred for the gay and lesbian and transgender bisexual brothers and sisters happened to show up against, I don't know, me, you, Mike Goodman, and Andrea, who were the 4 on council's well-being. And I told him that you didn't have an answer because, like, even if you have convictions, you would never, like, protest others by dyeing a fountain. And that it was probably Mike Goodman, but he's currently working with orphans in Africa, so he could call him.
All right, well, since we're going to tell this story.
No, we are. We were going to move on.
You know what? Yeah.
There was a giant preface statement.
So one of the things that Tripp will remember, one of the legends about me, is that I had this roommate at Campbell, Andy.
I mean, not everyone lucks out.
We don't have to go too deep into that story, but we were really close friends. We had a bromance going on, just really close. And we lived...
Hetero life partners.
We called each other hetero life partners, yeah.
Which, if you're a Kevin Smith movie fan, you know that that's a compliment.
Yeah. So
and I would totally be your Silent Bob.
You'd be a great Silent Bob.
I know.
That'd make me Jay,
Kevin
though.
Smith
and that would be
lots of podcasts.
So Andy and I, the religion professors were very confused about our sexual identity, and we like to keep it that way. So we both had a brown suit. It was a very different brown suit, but it was white pinstripe. But we would only wear it when the other one was not wearing it. So they thought we were sharing a suit. And they thought we were lovers and that we shared this suit. And so to their credit, we lived in a trailer that only had one bedroom. I mean, really, it only had one bedroom, but Andy was narcoleptic, so he would fall asleep at 11 no matter where he was.
It could be between my wife and I's apartment and their trailer.
Yeah. And I'd have to drag him back. So I usually got to sleep in the bed.
What are you doing right there? And are you praying?
No, he's sleeping.
He's sleeping.
He's just on the clock. 11 o'clock, he'd fall asleep. So he slept on the couch like every night through college.
If you married someone you know was going to just fall asleep, you'd be like, after 6 o'clock, you're not driving.
It's not a bad way to plan your life, though, if you have somebody who falls asleep every day.
I can't be the DD. I have narcolepsy, so this is an opportunity for you to earn your Servant Heart Award.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Andy and I, we had a kind of a thing going on, trying to mess with the religion professors and also just everybody in all the religious groups, just to kind of keep them guessing about our sexuality, our politics, our theology. So we would always just take alternative views or these kind of things. But what we did on a regular basis was every night we had, a drink with dinner, and we made each other dinner each night. It's very nice. It's a nice relationship, honestly. I'll tell you a story about that later. But we used to buy
I'm personally interested in one I don't know.
I've got one
later.
Yeah. But we would drink really cheap Merlot at dinner, And
but that was when Strawberry Hill from Walmart.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like she just gagged in her mouth.
We had a couple nights on.
Yeah, it's just like 30 ounces for $2.97. Yeah, you're like, this is a sermon example for later in life.
Yeah, well, I had my military ID, so we went down to the commissary and we used to pick up a 30-pack of Stroh's beer for $9. And we used to have like a Stroh's beer, and then we would have some cheap Merlot at dinner. And then, so this was college. I mean, what are you going to do?
You would take turns cooking.
So it happened to be, take turns cooking. Usually mashed potatoes. So one night, it was a Thursday night.
Something other than carbohydrates.
Yeah, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, or turkey or whatever. And it was a Thursday night, and like a lot of Thursday nights, we'd been overserved by each other. And so I had a Stroh's and maybe a Merlot or two. And then it was BSU time. So fine. You had dinner, so then you got to go to BSU.
Yeah.
So I was on council at the time.
And I was leading worship.
You were leading worship, if I remember correctly.
And Michael Goodman was president of the state BSU.
It was the whole state. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was it was an interesting time at Campbell. And so on the way to BSU from our trailer, we got sidetracked by the fountain. I mean, it's an alluring oasis in the middle of campus, so you can imagine. It was
also the name of the restaurant on campus at Campbell. You want to know the two things that they told me? I was getting interviewed by Adam English, and then Dr. Jonas was harassing me in Raleigh on Wednesday night. I heard two jokes that are Campbell jokes. They said, "Do you know why the founders of Campbell University made our mascot Gaylord the Camel?" And I said, because they were trying to take a stand on bathroom policy in advance. And Glenn Jonas, who is a Bruce Springsteen fan, every extra credit question on every church history thing was the boss. That was the answer. You didn't even have to read it. Just write the boss. You get extra credit. Yeah. And so I'd already made a joke about him canceling coming, and that he had said on a test, I was at an A- to A level. For someone hyper competitive like me, an A- when I know my wife already had an A in the class. I was going to do the extra credit, even though it was beneath me to do it normally. I've gone to therapy. It's been years. Don't worry. So I told him this story in the middle of it. I was like, well, and you said extra credit question, 5 points. Who was leading worship at the eschatological banquet? Yeah. And I said, the boss. And he was like, that's right. And I was like, exactly. That's how I know heaven's bathroom policy. and because you're Campbell and moderate Baptists have no opinions about anything controversial.
No. Well,
he just giggled
payday
off
lending.
Mike.
Yeah, payday lending.
Giggle off Mike. And then, and so we get that. He goes, no, it's none of that. They named it a camel because it's the only mammal in the world that can go 4 years without a drink.
Well, we didn't do that at Campbell. So my roommate, my first semester, had a 5-kegger my second week living with him and got kicked out. And all these people were there, and I remember having to, testify what happened that night, and I was like, I don't remember.
You know, one of the coolest things about being a parent at Baptist churches that are wet Baptists? That's what James Dunn used to call them. Wet Baptist,
yeah.
He's like, wet Baptists. They read the Bible where God's not an asshole, and they're allowed to have wine at dinner. James Dunn had the Baptist Faith and Message.
That's nice.
Anyway, so Baptist Joint Committee, and so he said that, and he goes, well, and they don't get to college and have one of those freshman year where you got to roll the dice to find out if you regret it for the rest of your life.
Right.
They have problems, but they're manageable.
Yeah.
And I was like, is this what you tell people when you go recruiting for the school somewhere? You're like,
it's a good recruiting tactic, actually.
I mean, I guess so.
Anyway, so we're on the way to BSU.
Yeah, let's go back to the story.
Should we get back to that?
I know.
So we're on the way to BSU. Andy and I had been overserved, and we may or may not have, depending upon how you read history, ended up in the fountain that night. So that's part of the process of the color change incident that happens later, was the night that we ended up in the fountain on the way to BSU. So that was one of those nights, yeah.
But that's not volunteering.
No, I mean that's
all right. Good.
Everybody knows that information. Yeah.
So I have been interviewed by the local newspaper religion person when I've done this the last 30 or so times about or a minister in the area or whatever. I have not ever had someone I've known since I was 18 talk to me who. One of our bonding experiences is my commitment that you're wrong. When you smirked earlier today, the moment I decided to make a slightly passing jab towards Catholic Baptist that extended into about 15 to 18 minutes.
It was a diatribe, if I remember, about the creed.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's one among many ways that I don't know, oppressive white men silence all sorts of other
I'm so
voices.
glad to know that now that you were talking directly to me about that.
Well, I saw your smirk, and I felt like I should keep my reputation as being a hard ass. So I'm interested.
Yeah.
When you called me and told me that you took a job at this wonderful church and that they had great decision making, what went through your mind when you find it out that Chrissy had already invited me to be here? Because
Yeah. Well, you know,
I mean, you didn't say no, but that's probably because you like my family.
Yeah. George is a nice guy.
You're like, your parents are fine.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, they tell you a lot of things when you're on the way to a church, but when you get there, you find out what the reality is. And so, they said a lot of things that I thought were true. And then I come here and learn that you're coming, you know, that throws everything out of the window. So now I have to rethink everything about this place. So, but we didn't cancel it, which is good. So you're here, and that's great. I think.
support that.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that, I think. Yeah, so, I mean, you know, do you want to talk about Catholic Baptists? Is that worth talking about?
No, I wanted to talk about Jesus.
All right, let's do that, yeah.
I mean, unless like the one person here even knows why I was giving you a hard time wants to talk about it.
No one here cares about that.
We should do that after, because there are like
I heard
4 beers that they make that are in the other
Well,
room.
you'll appreciate this. This is good, helpful understanding of the story and the
I'm
context.
interested in helpful.
Yeah, I heard once that they tried to use the creed in the liturgy at Myers Park. It didn't go so hot. So,
So having been someone who had Baptist history classes with 2 very liberal Baptists, when I found out that they had called you, I thought they must have found Jesus. And
yeah, some people said that while I was searching
like,
too.
No,
yeah.
no. So like I in my head, I was like, Ben Boswell's like the real Christian Baptist who I would appreciate his sermons, because this is a compliment. I mean,
Are you being serious? Is this genuine at this point?
No, it is. Like,
Okay.
I'm going to be genuine for just a second.
Okay.
But then I'm going to tell a story that's embarrassing. Don't worry.
Okay.
So Ben and I, we cultivated a friendship over just sheer animosity on a few issues. That it's kind of like Jesus and the Pharisees in the first century. Mm-hmm. They were like a half a degree apart. But after the Christians are no longer Jewish, they're like their enemies.
Yeah, Pharisees are horrible all of a sudden.
So, because I discovered this one of my New Year's parties, my grandpa, who was the chief master sergeant of the Air Force and a primitive Baptist. Yeah, his church was so primitive Baptist, they filled in the baptismal not to accidentally baptize a reprobate. And it makes for really hopeful funerals for all your family. That was a joke. Because they're like, wherever they are, they're there for the glory of God. So my grandpa is Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, like highest enlisted soldier Air Force, like the most intimidating person to me. And every female in the world thinks he's like a giant cuddle bear because he had a switch that he flipped like any Southerner. Yeah. And they're like, he would never say that. And I was like, yeah, he would.
Yeah, give him a glass of brandy and a cigar. Yeah.
Oh, and so he would host New Year's parties. And they started when I was in high school, and then we go to college, and we're friends. And then we're in Divinity School, and I'm at like Wake Forest University School of Divinity, Baptist and Heritage, Ecumenical and Outlook, and more open-minded than Duke University, where they train you to be a part of the Hauer-Wassian Mafia.
What's the point of even talking about this at this point with this ideology in the room?
Well,
it's sort of like white privilege. You can't deal with it. You just have to let it go.
I'm like Bart Ehrman.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. All right. So we had these New Year's parties, and because we had like at Campbell, we had like the world's most ecumenical version of just Baptists, right? Like, I mean, we're not talking about diversity, but we're talking about all like 48 types of Baptists were in the religion department. And we had this theory, we should just bring the party and it brings people together. And then maybe the next generation isn't going to be all bitter about fights about youth camps or whatever it is they're upset about. And then we could move on and get closer together. So like the New Year's party was like reconciliation time. So you have like PhD from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, like after it stopped being an educational institution. You have Southeastern.
88, 89. Yeah.
You have Southern students. You have the Mars Hill people, like the Furman ones, like the Candler. Oh, God, they're funded by Coke, and you know what Coke's known for.
Is that worse than Duke? Are they worse?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Because I always pull for North Carolina.
That's the only
schools.
compliment I'm going to get tonight. So.
No, I'll tell you the other one later. But so my grandpa's New Year's parties, which were essentially like my high school friends and my college friends and my Divinity school friends, came to be like the one time you would have like 14 Baptist schools versions of Baptist get together, and we were brought together by my crazy primitive Baptist grandpa with a shotgun setting fire to like 15 dried out Christmas trees with kerosene on top in a rainstorm, where he's like, all right, it's midnight. Let's do this. Yeah. Boom. And
wait. What you're not saying, though, is that you still have the spirit of your grandfather in you and love to burn Christmas trees. So make sure you say that.
Well, it's just in California, you aren't even allowed to have, like, itty-bitty fires.
Are they allowed to have Christmas trees there? I don't even know.
You're not even allowed to, like burn cigarettes within 30 feet of someone else's house. Yeah. You can only smoke weed next to their house.
I just remember seeing...
Because that's medicine.
Right. I just remember seeing the glow on your face as we lit that Christmas tree pile, because we all brought our dead Christmas trees to these parties.
Yeah. I mean,
it's amazing.
It's like a symbol of ecumenical unity.
Yeah.
And so you can always smile at the ending, and like eventually people are tired of arguing.
Yeah.
But then there are the elect, the chosen few, who are sitting till no one else cares.
Yeah.
And like, I just want you to know, like, you pretended to care until at least 2 or 3 in the morning.
A couple times, yeah.
And so they're lucky to have someone who, like, you are completely confident I'm crazy and wrong. And yet our friendship is so valuable to you that you listen with a pastoral heart.
Yeah.
You are present. And we burn things.
Things together.
True or false? Myers Park Baptist Church has never set 20 dry Christmas trees on fire to start the 12 days of Christmas.
No, they have never done that. That's true.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, but we did it at New Year's, so
we can. I got a second.
Yeah.
We can do this.
If it becomes a place where healthy theological disagreement can be held in friendship, then I think it's something we should do. I know. So I'm interested.
Yeah. Over the course of our years, what was the biggest problem that you've been praying for me for?
Man, I've been praying for you about Jesus for a while. And I've been praying for you about a little bit about process theology, praying for you about that too. Not really sure where that ends, but it seems like the weird thing is, like, now I've read your book and I'm like, well, crap, we end up at the same place sort of at the end, but we go there different ways. So then I'm kind of like, well, who cares? If Tripp can be a process guy and ends up still loving Jesus and community and church, then there's got to be something good about process.
So you're saying like we're like Sam and Frodo.
Right. Yeah. We're on a journey together.
We're on a journey.
Yeah, but that would mean we're taking the same path. We need to be like...
No, but for different narratives.
That's true. That's true.
Uh-huh.
Is this a good Tolkien segue to C.S. Lewis? Is that what you want to do?
Well, it's interesting because I actually have prepared some questions that I thought that you should answer. They may or may not have been given by random members of the congregation that you are now minister of.
I didn't agree to this, and I'm not sure I'll answer.
I have questions.
Look,
They're very
the
important.
whole point of this conversation that you just started was that we love to disagree with each other and can still be friends.
It's true.
So here's what we're going to do. If you want to ask me those questions and you want me to answer, I'm not going to say whether the answer I give is one I really believe or not. But I'll give an answer, but I'm not going to tell you whether or not I believe it, and you have to defend the opposite perspective.
So these questions I prayerfully made and prayed over for you, you'll give an answer. It may or may not be sincere.
Yeah.
And I'm obligated to disagree with you.
Yeah, like, isn't there that game where you ask me and I tell you 3 things and one of them's true? It's kind of like that, but you're not going to know whether it's true or false. I'm just going to give you an opinion about whatever you ask me, and then you have to argue the opposite.
Okay, so
no matter how nonsensical it is, you have to argue it.
All right.
Try to be as legit.
So
as
whoever's
you can.
more entertaining wins, I guess. That's like I don't know.
No,
so,
we'll let Chrissy gets to pick the winner.
Oh, all right. That's serious power, Chrissy. So, what is your email for congregants who are concerned as to whether or not you are being genuine in answering one of the questions?
It's cwilliamson@mpbc.
All right.
Yeah. Or C. Hughes, C. Veal, whatever you want.
There's a lot of options.
A lot of C names on our church staff, yeah.
Well, I know, but you're Christian Boswell, so...
Yeah, Christian, yeah.
Well, let's see here. My handwriting, which is not quite... It's way too clear for being my handwriting, but nonetheless, I'm interested, Ben. It's important to me. Which translation of the Bible do you prefer?
I prefer the King James Version.
Why?
Because it's aesthetically pleasing. And no other version is written with the same poetic attempts. Yeah.
Ben, au contraire, mon frère, I prefer, let's see, I prefer the New Revised Standard Version because every accredited school under the Association of Theological Schools has ceased.
I see that you like hegemony.
I was answering, you just stepped on my voice. I'm trying to disagree with you. I mean, I know that you partially like King James because King James was like edgy before it was edgy, but no one knew how edgy he was.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go with the NRSV because we don't need to create additional layers for people that don't obviously read it right out of the Koine or the Hebrew. But should you have been preaching tomorrow, I would have brought my Greek New Testament to verify the
Is that
truth.
your real favorite? Is the Greek New Testament?
I should have said that. That would have been like the most obnoxious answer.
That would have been
you
like...
were like, translation, it's the
I
one...
would have probably had to slap you, though, if you said that.
It's the one the Holy Spirit guides me to as I read it in the original Greek.
Right. Novum Testamum, right? What's the one that they give you in seminary? It's like a little blue cover on it. And somehow, like, you think you're cool because you carry it around with you during seminary a little bit to yours. Oh, I'm reading the Greek version.
You want to know, like, my parents gave a DVD of my Christian band in high school to a friend of mine in a PhD program who then like brought it out right at the right time, and he had edited the 30 seconds out of it in which I held my Bible and slapped it into my hand and made it go into replay.
That's a good image of you from high school.
Well, if someone asked you who is Jesus, how would you answer it?
I'd say he's the most awesome homeless dead Jew. How would you answer, Tripp?
Oh, well, I mean, I would have like some resonance with what you said, but I feel like that is like a wussy liberal cop-out.
I read a book with that title, too.
Yeah, straight up biblical Christianity. Like, if you read the Bible long enough, you know you no longer have to read it anymore.
Yeah.
And that you can go up to anyone, no matter who they are, and give them like a 3-option question, which will decide whether or not God it will enjoy, and you could probably listen, their eternal conscious torment, obviously, because God is love. And you ask them, liar, Lord, lunatic, pick. That's how I handle that junk, because I just don't want to be the reason that you are eschatological fuel.
Let's do the C.S. Lewis question, but you can't escape the typology.
Well, you have to pick one of them?
Yeah. So
then you pick Lord and let Jesus define it.
No. I pick lunatic.
Oh, you pick lunatic because he's crazy for love.
Yeah, he's crazy. He's crazy. The whole thing is crazy in the first place. This is what you're trying to say.
That was chapter 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. And the book is available in the back.
Yeah, the book is available in the back.
And look, I'm concerned, Ben.
Okay.
I need you to say more about your concerns about C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Well, I get a sense that you're not a fan necessarily of his theological ponderings and possibly a fan of his fiction.
Yeah, I don't think either's very good, but no, really.
You're about to make me defend him. I get what you're doing.
I don't think either's very good, particularly his fiction. Nonfiction is not terrible, but also misguided. I just think he's, British.
Au contraire, mon frere, I love C.S. Lewis. In fact, I'm pretty sure Tripp only used it in the title of his book because of search engine optimization techniques. So he was hoping to sell enough to get us further advanced next time.
Yeah.
That he wouldn't have to have 3 jobs to pay his health insurance. But C.S. Lewis's fiction is amazing because
this is so much fun, honestly.
Like the Narnia series,
yeah, it's deep.
Is an explanation of Christos Victor atonement theory and not penal substitutionary atonement.
Yeah.
And the black magic of that tablet in the Turkish delight and the witch that's white. And it's good that fiction has white as bad as opposed to,
right.
Obviously. Yeah, it's great. And there's beavers in it.
Yeah.
Like all of creation's there. And Saint Nick is in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yeah. And Saint Nick...
That's one of my problems with it.
Sandal slapped Arius at the Council of Nicaea for denying the full divinity of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So that's obviously why his fiction's great, but his nonfiction's even better.
Yeah, okay.
Because as someone who completely detests process theology and its rejection of divine omnipotence,
that's
in
you.
his book, that's my feeling. Like in his grief observed book, where he's describing the grief of having lost his lover, he repeats to himself long enough that God is omnipotent and did will it for good that he begins to believe it again instead of trusting his initial instincts that maybe the death of someone you love via cancer might not have been God's ideal. Why would you want to believe that the God revealed in Jesus doesn't want people to die of cancer randomly and you cease love? You should clearly believe that God willed it and repeat it to yourself long enough and then hand it off as a piety devotional so that everyone else who has been a victim of, a blessed recipient of God's seemingly violent will learns to treat it as good news. So
it's just like you were saying yesterday about if you just pray for your neighbor over and over and over again, eventually you might kind of love them.
That's how we became friends.
If you just say, I'm omnipotent, God's omnipotent, over and over again, eventually God will become omnipotent.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
That's how metaphysics works.
Exactly. So one
it's like
great
a
aside.
Koan.
I know you didn't get to go to Duke, but while we were there,
no, but just to clarify, I was accepted to SMU, Duke, and Claremont, and picked Claremont over Duke. So let's.
Okay.
I have standards.
Yeah. Well, since you didn't
go, a lot of it had to do with just irritation to J.J. Redick, and then he moves to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So the first time I see him,
you can't escape him.
The first time I see J.J. Redick in person, and he added tattoos, because obviously that doesn't make him quite as obnoxious. It still does.
Yeah.
I immediately remembered that ACC tournament, where his glorious 3-shot was just a itty bit too short, and they lost.
Yeah.
And the tears came. I didn't remind him of it because I have the love of Jesus in my heart.
It's as opposed to the other times when he hit 12 in one game against Wake Forest and they won by 12 points, 14 points or something like that. Yeah. Other games that are in my memory.
At least we were preseason number 1 that year.
Yeah. So anyway, at Duke, you'll like this actually. Jeffrey Wainwright is from Great Britain and he's a theologian, teaches theology. And there was this really annoying Navy chaplain at Duke. surprise, surprise, whose last name was Oliver, first name was Oliver. Anyway, he was really annoying, but he loved C.S. Lewis so much he would never stop talking about it. And Jeffrey Wainwright hated C.S. Lewis. And he always felt like it was...
every Ponnenberg student should.
Right, and he was like... He always felt like it was kind of a culturally insensitive to constantly bring up C.S. Lewis to a British guy.
Yeah.
So eventually one day in this class we had theology of language. Oliver's like, we're talking about Wittgenstein and somebody else that's really awesome.
As you would at Yale South.
Yeah. And so halfway through the conversation, Oliver raises his hand. He's like, that's like, when C.S. Lewis said da-da-da-da, and Jeffrey Wainwright finally just had enough with this guy. He's like, C.S. Lewis was a dick! Just yells it.
But
like
say
that.
it with a British accent.
I can't. Try. You try.
I've had too many drinks. I found
it was so
after
funny.
3 drinks, every accent I have is European, but it's all mixed together. It's like, C.S. Lewis is a dick. And you're like, what's that? It's French, Irish, whatever. Like, Peter Rollins, who's an Irish philosopher, and we lived together.
Yeah.
We lived together for about a year, and I could do his voice, and for 3 or 4 weeks, and people were like, "Oh, you sound just like him." And then, the moment he moved out, it went away, and it went back to a Southerner making weird noises. And the only thing you're good for is I fought in your general direction. Your mother is a hamster, and your daddy smells of elderberries. You've had to watch.
Yeah, they haven't watched Monty Python.
Yeah, okay. So before you watch Romero.
Yeah.
Watch Life of Brian.
Or the Left Behind movie.
But
you have to have...
I want you to know that your minister, as a missiological creative endeavor...
This is a good story.
...created community building liquid engagement activity.
This was before theology on tap was cool.
Yeah, before it was on tap. It was a game to Kirk Cameron's Left Behind film.
Yeah, it was.
Well, I'm just telling... No, you can't tell. You have to all show up and agree to participate to discover what it's like. And you sign a non-disclosure agreement when you get there that you can't tell anyone else what happens because it's hush-hush for Jesus.
What did you call the drink we had? We used 5 Alive and banana rum. What did you call it?
It was called a redneck martini. Because if it tastes sweet but it works too fast, that's called a redneck martini.
Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by Phillips Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a theological school that offers Christian education in service of intelligent, just, and compassionate religious and civic communities. They welcome students to a safe space for truth-seeking conversation about the Bible, Jesus, and faithful living. They have on-campus and distance learning options. Go check them out at www.wherefaithleads.com.